We have seen the last of Antonio Brown in an NFL uniform. Antonio Brown's career is over. Well, that's at least if you believe Antonio Brown himself. And, well, there's many reasons to not believe Antonio Brown at face value. If you take him at face value now, he's saying he's done, he's saying his career is over, and he's saying the risk is just not worth the reward any longer. So, Antonio Brown is saying that he's retiring from the National Football League for good. This is another episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course, this is a Steelers Now edition of Mic Drop. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I just couldn't help myself. I had to throw out my takes after this news. I had to give you my takeaways from Antonio Brown saying that he's retired from the National Football League. Antonio Brown busts out there Monday, late morning, early afternoon, social media posts galore. That's how he's going to break news, of course. That's how we followed him with his entire unraveling, was his 3 a.m. Instagram lives, and it was all over social media with his tweets. But he says he's walking away from football. And he actually put it quite literally on Twitter. One of his tweets says this: "I came, I saw, I conquered, mission complete. Call God." And then gives you the little hang loose. The little hang loose symbol that he loves to throw out there while he's calling God. And again, I don't know if to take this as gospel. In fact, when it comes to Antonio Brown, I've learned my lesson to never take anything he says as gospel. I covered the man for years. He basically just says one thing one day, and the next day could mean and say something totally different. So who knows? But there were recent rumors that the Seattle Seahawks, in particular with Russell Wilson advocating for Antonio Brown. They had worked out a lot in the offseason. He apparently had a look from Pete Carroll and the Seahawks staff. We know his recent connection with the Patriots, and obviously they basically booted him off the team. There's even the connection from the Patriots to Tom Brady in Tampa. Nothing serious about those rumors, but comments have gone back and forth between the two on social media. No real connection of him landing anywhere in the National Football League besides maybe the Baltimore Ravens and the Seattle Seahawks in the last several months, of teams that either were advocating for him publicly, Lamar Jackson doing that on Twitter, or the Seahawks getting probably the closest to maybe signing him. Could even go back to the Saints this past season, giving him a serious look and publicly saying they basically would have signed him if they knew the situation with his suspension. And we also knew that if he wanted to get back in the National Football League, he was going to miss some games. Just off the accusation enough, the accusation of committing sexual assault and rape, as awful as that is, was going to earn him some missed time. Even if that didn't lead to a conviction, as we know from Ben Roethlisberger, who ended up getting suspended even when that did not become a conviction, that's detrimental to the Shield. That's enough for Roger Goodell to take you out for several weeks. In fact, should probably be punishing you a lot further. So he was certainly going to miss some time, and those teams knew it. But his talent was still incredible, even with a year or so off. You still figured he could get it done. You still figured he could help a team and could be better than a lot of receivers out there. He looked good on a lot of tape out there, looked good in some practice video that we saw. And, of course, you never know from Instagram videos on how somebody actually can do in a live game. We've learned our lesson with NBA players over the years. Those IG video workouts don't mean a thing. But regardless, Antonio Brown still was playing at elite level last time he played in the National Football League. Even that game with the Patriots and the year prior with the Steelers. Looked good in preseason and some practice and training camp with the Raiders when he was there. So he had elite tape still relatively recent. Even if he dips off of that, you figure he's going to be a great player for you, or at least a good player. But one of my main takeaways is, if I have to believe this, is those offers didn't really come. No one was going to sign him, despite everything I just said in terms of his ability, for whatever reason. Maybe they learned something about the games he was going to miss. Maybe they learned something else about what happened in his personal life and how that maybe would conclude with those investigations and those accusations. Or maybe the black eye of what's going on in the world and how we've kind of learned in 2020 to maybe not put up with as much, that maybe it just wasn't a good look for them. Whatever it is, it clearly tells me the Seattle Seahawks maybe were his last straw. They weren't going to sign him. Maybe there was conversation between them and him, Pete Carroll and his camp, whoever the hell it is now, because he did fire Drew Rosenhaus, who was advocating it for him for years during that whole drama, that it wasn't going to happen. So Antonio Brown, maybe to save face, because he realized he wasn't getting back in the National Football League, he'll say, okay, I'm stepping away. He'll throw out the retirement, even though really he was being pushed out of the league. Okay, that was happening. He was being pushed out of the league. It's similar to, Barry Bonds, several years after he last played Major League Baseball, announced very briefly he's officially retiring. Well, nobody was going to sign him, and that was a whole different ballgame with steroids and a belief of cheating, even though he was obviously a great player. Not as much off the field, even though I'm sure he did have his personal off-the-field demons that I'm sure someone will bring up. But that wasn't what that was about. People just kind of, in baseball, they colluded. They really did, to get him out of the game after those records were set, because they figured he set those records with help of performance-enhancing drugs, and he wanted to play. He certainly did. Years later said, okay, now I'm done. Giants had already won a ring without him. It was already over. He was no longer playing. That happens also. That was just one example off the top of my head. That's happened with athletes before, where they get pushed out for whatever reason, fair or not, and then later on, years later, they announce retirement. At least AB didn't do that. At least maybe he was proactive with it. He saw the writing was on the wall. He saw he wasn't going to get a deal. Nobody was going to sign him, so he preempted what could happen years later. And instead of saying, T.O. did this, a comparison directly to football with a maybe ill-tempered, controversial wide receiver, and I'll get to their other connection in a moment here. But Antonio Brown, maybe now saying he's retired, maybe now saying he's done. The risk didn't get to the reward. Granted, he made tons of money, which we all know is one of the things he cares about the most. And football got him that. It got him his fame. He didn't get that elsewhere on his own. It was enhanced by him, but it was from football. That just to save face, the signings didn't happen. That's one major takeaway, aside from I don't really believe this man. We certainly could see him back. It would not surprise me if somebody calls him and then offers him a deal off of what I just said. Maybe it'll lead him back in the National Football League and he'll pretend this didn't happen. That's the way of life if you're Antonio Brown. But again, AB says he's done. Antonio Brown claims he's walking away from football. Now, I do want to make this clear, too, because the next thing I got to say here, and everyone knows the personal issues with Antonio Brown. Everyone knows his personal life at this point. Everyone knows what's happened in the last couple of years. And quite frankly, if you don't, I'm not going to bore you on this particular show. You're welcome to hit up the entire channel. And you can go back to about anything from 2018 to, I don't know, late 2019. Quite frankly, mix it around, even in 2020 some. And you're going to find some Antonio Brown shows. You're going to find me hosting them. You're going to find, you can search Antonio Brown on Steelers Now. You can search Antonio Brown on Pittsburgh Sports Live under the mic drop section, under the Steelers Now section, as you see behind me there in the video. And, of course, I would love for you to click subscribe while you're doing so. But you can find tons of takes on Antonio Brown and all the news that kept on developing in my several years of covering him, from what I did with the Trib and covering him there to now throughout the Now Network. But we all know that. The separate part of that is, does that now affect his Hall of Fame candidacy? Because I'm one of my tweets here when I first saw the news, and this is very, very true when you're talking about Antonio Brown. And I'll read it because I didn't actually throw a screenshot up here, but what Antonio Brown's legacy should be: an incredible journey from humble beginnings to becoming one of the greatest receivers ever through incredible hard work. And I kind of added incredible there to my own words because his hard work was incredible. He was one of the hardest workers ever. This man came out of Central Michigan, wasn't highly touted, was undersized, didn't have the body of T.O. or Randy Moss. He was not supposed to be what he was. He did appear in a Super Bowl, but he wasn't the number one receiver. He was way down on the depth chart there. He then became the best receiver in football, and for a 6-year stretch, you're talking about over 100 catches, 1,000+ yards, in fact 1,200+ yards in most of those seasons. You're talking about double digits in touchdowns. You're talking about one of the most charismatic, energetic, and at that time popular among certainly Steeler fans, if not all the National Football League, before that personality dipped. And we can even go, and I did shows with former Steelers kicker, two-time Super Bowl champion Jeff Reed. He was a frequent guest of mine on my Triple Live radio days, and he often talked about it. And there's one of those on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. You can find this show there just to refresh your memory. He talked about a young Antonio Brown and comparing him to what later became Antonio Brown that we all learned. And he saw rumblings, and he saw that guy kind of creeping there, and then the money maybe exposed it all. So I could see that, but regardless, he was a very, very, very hard worker who put in the time and outworked everybody, even if maybe he wasn't the most talented guy in the room. He made sure that he worked harder than you, even if maybe you were blessed with more gifts. And not to say he wasn't blessed with incredible talent and was not just naturally, call God gifted as one of the greatest receivers of all time. But it took incredible work for him. He was not given the hype of several other legends of his same era. So that's what his legacy should be. Unfortunately, the other part of it is what Antonio Brown's legacy is. All-time great receiver who became a complete lunatic that ruined his own career. That's also the case for Antonio Brown, and that's probably more what he's remembered for. That's probably more of his legacy as a guy who just unraveled, exposed himself, got in legal trouble, got in personal trouble, really became just not a good guy at all, and a guy that nobody wanted to be around in the National Football League. It later puttered him out of the league altogether, and now we get here where he says, and again, where he says, Alan even put it in the headline there as we're joking, as I was editing for him, because, again, it's his words. We can't say anything's factual, and this man could turn around tomorrow and say, just kidding, just wanted to make Mike do shows, make everyone go crazy, get all this content up, and nope, going to try it again. So what he says right now that he's walking away from football, that's the juxtaposition of his legacy. That's Antonio Brown in a nutshell. Some may remember him as just one of the greatest receivers ever who worked really hard to get there. And then, yeah, you're going to also remember that he was kind of a personal issue. I don't even know how I can possibly articulate this, but if he was a personal issue problem, if he was a guy that didn't really have the character issues that you would want, or that didn't really have the character that you'd want, he had tons of character issues. And that's just, again, just really summarizing. There's tons of content we put up, and everybody else did too. Just Google search Antonio Brown. You're going to find legal trouble. You're going to find personal trouble. You're going to find tons. I could even tell you some stories off air that I won't put on this program. So he had his issues, to say the least. And that could be part of what you're going to remember. I think that's part of what most fans are going to remember for Antonio Brown. But that then segues into the Hall of Fame. And I already got into some debates with this on Twitter after the news broke. And I'm a guy that Antonio Brown blocked on Twitter. And I'm not Ed Bouchette. I'm not to that level. I'm not a Hall of Fame media member by any means. I've had a decent career. I've accomplished a lot more than I ever thought, but I'm not Ed Bouchette. Certainly not Ed Bouchette. The guy that's going to be fighting for former Steelers to be put in Canton someday. He's the guy that stands in there and fought for Jerome Bettis, fights for those guys, and wants them enshrined. Antonio Brown obviously will be a candidate someday. That's a fact. Nobody can deny that. He's going to be a candidate. He's going to be on ballots. He put that body work together. Way lesser guys at least get to be a candidate where someone will fight for them, and it's going to have to be Ed Bouchette. He's going to be a career Steeler. He did have that brief training camp with the Raiders and that one game with the Patriots, but you're talking about him playing his career, the 99% of it, if not more, 99+%, with the Steelers. So he'd have to be represented by Steelers media unless Ed Bouchette retires from it, gives it up. And I make this clear, if there's anybody else, they would be a harder draw for AB. Because a lot of other media members, a lot of younger media members like myself, may hold personal grudges. He's treated us really poorly over the years. And it's not to say he treated Ed Bouchette well. Ed Bouchette, who was with multiple outlets covering him now in recent years, just from when I was there around the Steelers, and Ed certainly covered that team 30-plus years before in AB's whole career, dealt with a lot from Antonio Brown, in which Antonio Brown directly called him a clown, was trying to disparage Ed Bouchette's entire career. And Ed Bouchette's one of the nicest guys I've been around, very gracious and nice to me the second I walked in the door before he even knew who I was. Again, I've been with multiple outlets, and they all were competitors, whether it be digital form or even an established brand outlet here in the Pittsburgh market, always kind of against Ed Bouchette and wherever he was working, which is tough for us. But Ed was always very nice to me, sat next to him at lunch. Constantly he would share words of wisdom in his career, so he's one of the best guys I've been around. Agreed to even record a video for my grandfather for his birthday one year. He's a guy that you're going to know in national media respects the most in terms of media member, certainly covering the Steelers in Pittsburgh. You're going to think of Ed Bouchette. Certainly outside of this market, certainly all time, and he deserves that. So this is a guy that Antonio Brown attacked and basically said was a hack, and that's just not the case, obviously. But Ed Bouchette's character is also of a guy, and I told somebody this when they were saying, well, a media member is not going to fight for him, that's going to hurt his case even further. Yeah, normally that would. And that may have hurt T.O., which is why I had to wait several years, and may have hurt other guys in some respects. But Ed Bouchette, knowing him personally, he's not going to hold that grudge. He was attacked personally by A.B., but if he believes those numbers to be Hall of Fame caliber, if he believes he should be in just off of his on-field play, Ed Bouchette will fight for him. He will plead the case. He will list the numbers. He will list the accomplishments individually, which are Hall of Fame caliber worthy. He'll do it, 100%. I certainly trust that Ed Bouchette will do the right thing by Antonio Brown in that regard. The other end, though, is if he should be in the Hall of Fame, because I actually heard some people, and I think they're just really trying to talk themselves out of it because they hate the man, because a lot of Steeler fans, of course, are not going to like him, and that's where the debate's going to be. That's who's going to be caring, since he was a career Steeler, basically. That all his numbers at the end of the day, 5+ years from now, or even beyond that, if he has to wait for personal issues like, say, T.O. did. Eventually, T.O. got in, and I've said before that T.O. should have been a first-ballot Hall of Famer. Certainly, if Randy Moss was a first-ballot Hall of Famer with his personal issues, despite being a legendary receiver, T.O. should have been as well. That was part of why he didn't show up. That was unfair how they were treated in kind of different regard, even though they both had character issues, but both were transcendent, revolutionary receivers. They both should have been first-ballot guys. And Antonio Brown, maybe not to their level. He's not their level with an overall body of work as much of an all-timer, but he certainly put up Hall of Fame numbers. He certainly has a 6 or 7 year stretch that is unparalleled, really, in the National Football League's history. It's some of the best individual seasons ever in that same era when they were still playing, and in an era where they were kind of gone as well, and then there were other greats and setting the world on fire, and even more of freak athletes. AB still dominating in that kind of era towards the end of those guys and into what now we see, still very much connected with this current generation, that the Hall of Fame resume is there on the field, and I believe Ed will fight for him and do the right thing. But there are some saying that, okay, that's all true, but when you look at the end of the day, in 5+ years overall body of work, there's going to be other receivers this next era after him that are just going to take those numbers down a notch and down another notch, and it's just going to be a situation where his numbers will pale in comparison. Sure. That would have happened whether he was a good guy or whether he's who he told us he is. His numbers need to be viewed in comparison to other guys of his era. It's the same, and I use this comparison, it's the same as saying Dan Marino's an all-time great passer. He's one of the all-time great quarterbacks. Johnny Unitas is an all-time great quarterback even before him. And they're not disparaged, or it's not like they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because many guys after them would knock their numbers down a notch. When Dan Marino came along and set the world on fire and set those new records as a passer, it didn't mean Johnny Unitas was no longer good or no longer deserving of recognition or should be taken out of the Hall of Fame or shouldn't have been put in. No, that just means we're in a new era. People are passing more. It's a different generation, and you're going to have increased numbers. You're going to have increased numbers throughout the history of sports every single generation as you go. You're going to have a year 100 years from now, when they're probably still playing the National Football League, where someone's going to put up 5,000 yards in a single season. They're going to be passing so much. It seems crazy, but it's just as crazy as it sounded 50 years ago to what numbers Antonio Brown would eventually put up. Antonio Brown has video game numbers in comparison to that time. Someone else will make Antonio Brown's numbers look like nothing decades from now. But it doesn't mean Antonio Brown, in context to his era, was not dominating, was not the best in football, because he was. For over half a decade, he was the best receiver in all of football, and he was a Pittsburgh Steeler during that time. And you're not going to say you're not going to say that a guy doesn't get in. It's not a listing of the top 10 all-time numbers, whether it be yards, passing yards, touchdowns, receptions, whatever, sacks for defense, interceptions. That's not the Hall of Fame. And I can go for stats in other sports if you'd like here. The Hall of Fames are not about just the top 10 in every single category, because if that's the case, no old guy would ever get in. There would never be a time where somebody this year would get in on a veterans committee that played 20 years earlier and had to slide, and now he's voted in. He's voted in now, for example, because he still was elite and great at that time, and in context to his era, deserved recognition eventually for the Pro Football Hall of Fame or whatever Hall of Fame it may be. And all Hall of Fames, work in this way, voting past guys in eventually. Not everyone's a first or second ballot Hall of Famer. You vote somebody in, you compare them, and you choose to elect them based on what they do in context of their era. Okay? In context of their era. In context of Antonio Brown's era, he's one of the greatest receivers of all time. And that's hard to dispute, even if you don't like him personally. You can't look at his numbers 20 years from now in a vacuum and say, okay, he's the 15th best receiver of all time because there's 14 guys who are better than him in terms of numbers. No, as I lose the video behind me here. That's not the case. You're not going to look at it that way. You're going to compare him to what he does in his era. Okay? That's the situation. You got to look at Antonio Brown, what's happening in his era, and how he is in his era. You have to say that Antonio Brown's numbers are great for his era. So yes, there's going to be guys, that's just a given, that are going to dominate and have better numbers after him, but that does not mean it takes away from him. So Antonio Brown is deserving of the Hall of Fame. Antonio Brown is eventually going to get there, and if T.O. eventually got in, even though it should have been first ballot, that means Antonio Brown is eventually going to get in, even if he has to wait and wait longer than maybe even T.O. waited because he's not to that level. But Antonio Brown is deserving of the Hall of Fame if you want to be fair to him on the field, because the Hall of Fame is not a morals clause. There's nothing about the Hall of Fame that says a rape accusation can't put you in. There's an accused murderer who's currently in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. No one's taken him out. First of all, you would need a conviction to really go that route. You can't just do guilty until proven innocent, even if you believe the man to be guilty. You can't punish off just an accusation. That's an incredible slippery slope. And second of all, it's not the Hall of Fame of the greatest human beings to ever live. It's the Hall of Fame of football. It's the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It is not the greatest humans Hall of Fame. So leaving all of that aside, he's deserving of the Hall of Fame in terms of what he did on the field. He will have to wait, but you can't worry about what's going to happen future in the league. You have to worry about it happens now in his era and what he did in comparison to his era. It doesn't disparage past players by somebody setting up better numbers later on. Every later player is going to have better numbers. There are quarterbacks who played in this era that won't be in the Hall of Fame that have better career numbers than guys played in the past, because it's all contextually compared to what they do in their era as it should be. Now, the only other thing with Antonio Brown, and we talk about Hall of Fame, we talk about legacy, we talk about whether you believe the situation or not, is to whether this would be how it ends, whether this would be how the story ends, whether or not this exodus from the game is really the last we're going to see of Antonio Brown. And to be honest with you, I really do feel that is the case. I don't feel that he's retiring because he doesn't want to play anymore or believe anything about worth the risk. If the money is there, he'll want to play. I believe no one was going to sign him. Everything else that went on was too bad, They learned maybe the games he was going to miss or what those results are going to be. They didn't like hearing all of it. And he was forced into this corner and forced out of the league because of his own actions the last 2.5+ years. And honestly, it's his bed. He's lying in it. He certainly deserves it. No one's going to feel bad for him. I will say, though, as somebody, again, who was blocked by him, made my job very, very difficult in covering him and didn't really have the best interactions with Antonio Brown over the years, even though not nearly as bad as some others, that he deserves the Hall of Fame. He deserves that recognition eventually, even if he has to wait. He deserves now to wait a few because T.O. had to wait a few, even though he shouldn't have. But if you're going to make T.O. wait, go ahead and make A.B. wait. He should have to sweat it out for a few years. I'm not against that. He made his bet. He can lie in that. But I also think he eventually needs to be put in there. You look at those numbers, they're there. You look at from 2013 to 2018. Basically before the drama really, really erupted, and some of it certainly was there towards the latter half of 2018. And I'm not to say it wasn't there during that time, but it really, really got bad. But this is where he really had his elite seasons, and the better he got, the more of a malcontent he kind of became. But you're looking at 2013, 110 catches, 1499 in terms of yards, 8 touchdowns. Next year, 129 catches, 1,698 yards, 13 TDs. 106 catches the next 2 seasons later. That's 1,284 yards that year. I skipped one, though, in the middle. It's 136 catches, and that is an incredible single season total, by the way. 136 catches in 2015, 1,834 yards, and 10 touchdowns. That right there is one of the greatest single seasons in football history for a receiver by far. By far. Again, 2015, 136 catches, 1,834 yards, and 10 touchdowns. 13.5 yards per catch. That's incredible. That's over a first down, and he did that for most of his career, but that's almost halfway to double the first down. I mean, that's just insane what he did. He was targeted 193 times that season, so had 136 catches for 1,834. Again, incredible. We know about the next year that I just read there. He followed it up with not nearly as great of a season with 106, 1,284, but more touchdowns with 12. That shows you how great he was prior. If that's a pedestrian season, that's still an all-pro season. He then would finish out with 101 catches and 104 catches, respectively, the next 2 years, 1,533 in 2017 and 1,297 in 2018. And then you're seeing him having a counterpart in Juju some of those years, and Juju would have great numbers that he certainly helped as well, and we've talked about that too, now affecting Juju. Struggled last year, got injured, didn't play well when in there. It was his first year without Antonio Brown taking the double coverage. Now it's on Juju. We'll see what happens, but Antonio Brown took the double coverage most of those seasons. He certainly did in the beginning of his career, even though they were great numbers, but 5-6 years where they were all-time, all-world numbers, including the greatest single season for a receiver in history, or at least one of them. You can bring up a Megatron season as part of that too. Certainly some of Jerry Rice's, some of Randy Moss's, T.O.'s. They're the best ever, those 3. But AB has that single season that it's really, really up there with anybody else. You certainly compare it with anybody else. He was the guy. He was dealing with the double coverage. It was him. So, again, Antonio Brown deserved recognition for what happens on the football field. If he doesn't, then O.J. Simpson doesn't. Then a lot of other guys. Then Ty Cobb in baseball. A lot of other guys don't in terms of him as a person. But they're getting it because it's not the greatest humans Hall of Fame. It is the Hall of Fame of that sport. And on the field, there's no cheating scandal. There's no steroids here. On the field, he worked really hard. He became the best. He dominated his era. And his numbers, in terms of contextually to his era, still stack up with a lot of other guys and certainly still stack up all time, even though somebody, of course, is going to come along and peg him down a notch in terms of all-time numbers. But that will happen naturally anyway, and it does not disparage Marino for quarterbacks. It doesn't disparage Antonio Brown right now as a receiver. I do think he'll have to wait a while. I don't know if he'll get in right away. I do trust Ed that will fight for him properly and do what's right on the field. I don't think we're ever going to see him back in the National Football League, though. I do think he was forced out. He wants to save face, but I think we're done with AB. And I got to say, I don't really feel bad for the man, but that does not mean he doesn't deserve the recognition that he put the work in and that truly will dictate the museum and the story of the National Football League. You really cannot have a Pro Football Hall of Fame tell the story of the NFL, tell the story of that generation, certainly of receivers, say Randy Moss and T.O. were done being the greatest ever. That period was kind of over. There was a lull in the middle. Megatron retired a little early. Calvin Johnson retired earlier than many would have liked. Larry Fitzgerald being consistent, of course. But Antonio Brown was a transcendent, marketable. He was more than just a football player. He did a lot for the game in that regard and was the best on the field for a significant chunk of time. Granted, he ruined his own career. He ruined it towards the end. His ego got out of control. Jeff Reed and others have definitely made it very clear that that was him all along, and I kind of believe him. Again, go back and listen to my talk with Jeff Reed about what happened between the two of them early in AB's career and late in Jeff Reed's career when he was a veteran on that team and already had a ring in his finger that AB, of course, did never get. And that's another end that it shows you the type of guy AB is. As much as I'm saying that he deserves the Hall of Fame, and he does, as much as he was one of the greatest ever, and he was, it was clear for him to say mission complete, and you look in the longer post there on Instagram that he accomplished everything he ever set out to accomplish. Individually, he did. Individually, he was the best ever. He was all-pro multiple times over. He has the greatest single-season year you certainly could argue in history. He put up all those numbers that you would want for the period of time that he played. Doesn't have all in terms of the all-time record because he didn't play long enough, and he got tons of money, which is what he wanted out of it too. So individually, he maybe got what he wanted out of the game. And that should put him in the Hall of Fame someday for what he did on the field. But it also shows you what his priorities really were, where they really were. For him to say mission complete and he accomplished everything he wanted, this is a guy that despite being the best in the game, and I know it's a team sport. I'm not going to say it was his fault. He had great years. 2015, they didn't win a ring. It wasn't his fault. He had one of the greatest years ever. You need to have a team to win. The defense let him down several of those years. Some of those years they didn't have a number two, so there was tons of coverage over his way. Some of those years Ben wasn't up to snuff in comparison. I'm sure AB will bring that up more than anybody else. However, he didn't win a ring. He did not win a championship. And when you're a little kid playing and you're eventually going to be a pro athlete, you dream of winning a championship. You dream of catching a game-winning pass to win a Super Bowl, like, say, Santonio Holmes did as an ex-Steeler. Santonio Holmes did not have as great of a career as Antonio Brown. Santonio Holmes is not going to be in the Hall of Fame. No one would ever vote for him. He's not going to be in any conversation or debate for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Steelers recognize him, and that's it, and that's because of that moment more than anything else. And he also had a pretty poor exodus from the Pittsburgh Steelers with some character issues. Similar talent, worked hard too, but AB was the best in the game during a period of time and has way better numbers and did way more. Santonio Holmes, the game-winning catch to win a ring. Antonio Brown was a much better player and deserves the Hall of Fame. However, Santonio Holmes, again, he won a ring. AB did not. So as much as it's not AB's fault, and I'm not going to blame him, his career was what it was. It was one of the best ever and deserved recognition, at least on the field. To say you're accomplished, to say you did it all, and to say that you don't have any regrets and mission complete without winning a ring, that's just being disingenuous. That's not being true to what you probably were dreaming of as a kid and what every athlete really does want and strives for. Some certainly just want the money, and some certainly just want the numbers, and that's Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown's priorities were money and numbers, and winning was third, if not way further down the ladder. It might actually have been money, numbers, marketing, girls, whatever else, and then maybe winning if it comes. That shows you where the priorities really were. It was not about winning a championship, and there are many athletes who retire without a ring who are all-time greats, who we remember as all-time greats. They publicly say they didn't achieve everything they wanted because they wanted to win a championship. Listen to Charles Barkley, all-time great. He says, I wanted to win a ring. I didn't. I feel like that's the only blemish on my resume. Well, it's still a blemish. AB doesn't see it that way because he didn't care. Didn't care about winning, did not care about winning a championship, and if they would have won that ring and he would have had one catch for 7 yards in that game, he would have complained, he would have moaned, and he wouldn't have been happy with it. He wouldn't have celebrated. Antonio Brown wanted money, numbers, and women, and he got all of that, and he got fame too. So he wanted numbers, he wanted stats, money, women, and fame. Antonio Brown's priorities were about statistics, individual accomplishment, money, women, and fame. Any order you want to put them. The women and fame might actually be 1, 2. The winning, way down the line, it's proven by what he says now as he closes the chapter. But Antonio Brown says he's done. I think he deserved recognition on the field. He deserves the Hall of Fame someday. I'm sure he's going to have to wait. I think Ed will do right by him, though. And we need to stop kind of picking apart the career that was one of the greatest ever just because we don't like the guy. You can't talk about how numbers are going to be better later on. Of course they are. You don't do that to other athletes. And we'll now see where the personal goes, but he was forced out. He didn't choose to be out. Don't kid yourself. This is a man who tried to save face, and I'm able to read right through it, and hopefully most of you guys can too. Want to make sure to tell you to hit up the family of networks, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Now, Steelers Now here, SteelersNow.com, where we have all this coverage on Antonio Brown claiming he's retiring from football, as well as everything else going on in the National Football League's return, and kind of controversy there because they're not really releasing a plan, and players are upset about it in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, of course, WV Sports Now, Pittsburgh Golf Now, one of our newer members of the Now Network, Pittsburgh Soccer Now, and of course Pittsburgh Hockey Now with the Penguins getting towards the playoffs. Stanley Cup playoffs are going to happen, so we'll see what happens there with the goalie controversy already going on from only a couple days of practice and a couple scrimmages. Follow us on social media at Steelers Now on Twitter, Steelers Now on Facebook, at pghsportslive.com for all this video content where it lives in website form, and of course at PGH Sports Live on Twitter and Pittsburgh Sports Live on Facebook. You can find me there in the below on the graphic at Mike Asti 11, and you can find AB Antonio Brown at AB84. It's an entertaining Twitter. I can't follow it on my personal because he has me blocked, but we'll see where the rest of the accounts take me. I'm still able to see him on the other accounts that I managed. Again, Antonio Brown's done, or at least he says so. Yes, he's a Hall of Famer and deserves the Hall of Fame. We'll see if he gets there. And, well, this is a story of a guy being forced out of the league no matter what he tries to tell you.